Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Saturday. You all made it here. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm here to talk to you today about React. My name is Eve Porcello. You can find me online at Eve Porcello. You can always send me an email, eve@moonhighway.com. I can always answer any questions. No statute of limitations on that. Send me an email in 5 years, and I will respond to any questions at all. So I'm here today to give you a gentle intro to the React library. So I'm particularly excited about giving this talk because with React and with programming in general, it sometimes can feel like everybody must know React already. Everyone must know TypeScript already, or whatever the newest thing is. And the truth about it is, even though React is a really popular project, they have 138 stars on GitHub, and everybody likes to talk about those metrics a lot. But that's about the same number of people as go to Coachella every year. That's about the same number of people who live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is a great place. I've been there, but it's pretty small. And about 7.2 million people watch The Bachelor every single week. So as far as the comparison goes, we're not really talking about a whole lot of people. The people who like React a lot are a pretty small group of people. So we're going to go with a gentle intro this morning. So I'm here from Tahoe City, California. I just live in the far East Bay up there in the mountains. I work for Moon Highway, where we teach JavaScript and React and GraphQL to organizations all over the country. You might have seen our courses on LinkedIn Learning or Egghead. And we've written a couple books. So this new one, Learning React, is a rewrite of another book called Learning React. And that one is pretty out of date because React has changed a lot. So if you're just getting into the React library, now's a really great time to get started. So just slating us from the start, React is a JavaScript library used for building user interfaces. What else have you heard about React? What have you heard about React out there on the streets? What do you know about it? It's the hot new thing. Cool. Love it. Yeah. Yeah, you can use little pieces of it. You can use React in small components on your overall website and, yeah, build small things. Anybody else? What's the hot goss on React? I'm going to trip over this chair at least 5 times. I'll move it back a little. Yeah. Yeah, it's about components. Exactly. So React is a library for building user interfaces, components. We can use it in small bits in our applications. But really, when we're talking about a library like React, we want to think about what makes a JavaScript library good? Is it the number of stars that it gets on GitHub? Is it the number of downloads on NPM? The number of people on Twitter talking about it? How do we pick the best tool to do the best thing, to build the best thing? And how do we know that it's worth our time? So when React was first released in 2013 by Facebook, there was a lot of conversation around whether or not React was good. And there were a lot of people who were skeptical about it, who just found it really upsetting because some of the things that it pushed out to us. So to respond to these critiques, Pete Hunt, he was a guy who worked on the React team, he wrote this article called Why React? And he said that instead of panicking about React, instead of getting mad at React, instead of writing blogs about how React is bad, he suggested give it 5 minutes. Take a look, give it a spin, and see how it goes. So yeah, React is this pretty small library, and it doesn't come with absolutely everything that you need to get things done. Give it 5 minutes. And sometimes when you're writing React code, it looks like there's HTML in your JavaScript, and that can make people upset. Give it 5 minutes. Big companies, big teams have given React a chance, have decided that React is good because they gave it 5 minutes. And places like Uber and Twitter and PayPal, where we're standing right now, have realized that React can help them iterate and build products faster. So I'm going to suggest that we all give it about 50 minutes. I've been talking for like 10 minutes. And we're just going to take a look. We're going to take React for a spin, and we're going to do a lot of live coding. So let's go ahead and dig in. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to get started just in this index file. So I want us to all take a look at some of kind of the core concepts of what makes React React. So oftentimes you'll hear React referred to as a functional JavaScript library, functional JavaScript. And if you're coming from another functional language, that might make you want to leave this room right now. It might make you really mad. JavaScript isn't necessarily a functional language. It's not necessarily an object-oriented language. But there are ways that we can use functional approaches. We can use functional principles in React and in JavaScript. So for example, JavaScript supports, I'm trying to clear this up. So JavaScript supports functional programming because we can use functions as first-class citizens. So for example, if I created a function here called log, log is going to take in a message, and then it's going to console log that message. So it's just a function. Then when I log something, I'm going to say hello world, because it's the law of programming that I have to say hello world in the first 10 minutes of anything. And then when I refresh and I look at our console, there we go, we see hello world. So this is a variable in JavaScript, and it's also a function. So functions can be variables. React is often also called a declarative language. So when we call something declarative, we're talking about we describe what should happen instead of how it should happen. So let me show you an example of some imperative code. That's a good way to compare and contrast imperative versus declarative. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a string. So our string is just going to say restaurants in Honolulu, because we should be thinking about Hawaii today. And then I'm going to create a variable called URL friendly. So basically what I want to do is I want to take this string here, and I want to turn it into a string that's friendly for a URL. Think about like restaurants in Honolulu. That's what a URL might look like. So the way that I would do this imperatively is I might use a for loop in JavaScript. So I would say for a variable I equals 0, I is less than string, this string here, dot length, and then I++. So this is going to help me iterate over this string. It's going to help me look for any spaces and replace them with dashes. And then we're going to put them all into this empty string and build a whole new string. So far, so good? Stoked? We're building strings. It's happening. If you can't see my screen at any moment, too, you have to tell me. That's the law. You have to tell me. So just let me know. I know my head is very large. That's been a thing throughout my life, but I'm trying to keep it on this side. So we're going to go ahead and say that if the value in the string, if the letter in the string, res, etc., is a space, then we want to replace it with a dash. So we'll say URL friendly plus equals a dash. And then, yeah, we want that to be a space, right? Not just nothing. Cool. So you're quietly helping me. I appreciate it all day. I'm live coding on a Saturday morning. This is really weird. So we're going to go ahead and say URL friendly. And then we'll just add any letters to this string. We'll add, instead of spaces, these dashes. So we're imperatively saying that we want to replace those. So I'm going to say URL friendly, console log that. And then when I hit refresh, we should see restaurants in Honolulu. So this is how we would do things imperatively. We're saying, given any string, we want to iterate over it, and we want to replace those spaces with dashes. Now here's where we would do it alternatively. If we were using let's see, let's just comment this out. So here's how we would do this if we were using kind of a declarative model. So instead, we would say URL friendly equals string.replace. And then we'd use this regular expression here. So we'd say replace any spaces. That's what those slashes are for. So we replace those with a dash. All right. And so now, if I hit refresh on that, we see all sorts of problems. Good morning. Oh, yeah. That shouldn't be there, right? We can do that. I'm checking regular expressions, but that's not where I should be looking. Cool. So this is going to just replace this. So this is kind of the contrast between imperative and declarative. This is imperatively saying, we're going to do this, do this, do this. This function here is described as being declarative. So we're going to look at this string, and in the event that there's a space, we'll replace it with a dash. So that's something to keep in our back pocket as well. And this is a little bit easier to read. This is a lot of typing. We're busy people. We want to maximize our time. Another core concept in React is immutability. Immutability just means that instead of overwriting variables, we should make copies of them and create new objects or create new values. So here I'm going to create something called lawn color. What is this? This is just a color. So it's going to have a title, lawn, like green. Then it's going to have a color value. So this hex color value is 00FF00. And then finally we'll say rating is 0, because no one's rated it yet. Or let's give it a 5. That feels mean to give it a 0 rating. Then let's go ahead and we're going to write a function called rateColor. RateColor is going to take in the color, and then it's going to take in a rating. So this is going to be a new rating for this color. We're going to rate it again. So then we'll say color.rating equals rating. Then we'll return the color. So at this point, we should console log this to see what's going on. Here I'll call this function rateColor, and I'll pass in our lawn color, and then our desired rating. So we'll give it a 3. And then we also want to console log the rating. Let's also console log lawn color dot rating. So this is going to call that function and give us the rating. Call function, give rating. And then this is just going to give us whatever that rating is for the lawn color. So let's take a look at it. We see that this one here, we have 3, and then we also have 3. So not only have we changed the rating, but we've changed the rating in the color itself. We've overwritten that value. So here's how you might approach this differently. So instead of actually changing that color value, let's do this. So we'll rate color. We'll take in the color and the rating. And this time we're going to return a new object. So we're going to say ... color. What's that ... syntax all about? Yeah, it's a spread operator. So it's going to take all of these values and it's going to push them into a new object. Then we're going to take the new rating, and this will replace whatever rating is here. So, not making any changes to our console logs here at all, we can hit a refresh, and we'll see that the first one gives us that value. It's changed the rating. But we see that it hasn't overwritten the rating in the actual object. So this is one of those things that we can do when we're writing our JavaScript code, and something you see advocated for in the React community quite a bit, is this idea of immutability. Let's say you wanted to take your birth certificate and get a copy of it. You would want to hide all of your all of your private information, I should say. You wouldn't want to scratch it out with a Sharpie. You instead would want to make a copy and then scratch out those hidden details on the copy, not on the actual birth certificate, because that would be bad. Yeah. Please. Absolutely. So this ... thing is a really useful new syntax that is now part of the JavaScript language, and it's called the spread operator. So what the spread operator does is it takes the object that we're passing in, the color, and it makes a copy of it. So this ... syntax says push all of the values, title, color, and rating, into a new object. And then here on line 19, that's where we're overwriting the rating with the value that we're passing into the function here. On line 28, we're passing in 3. And what this does is it doesn't overwrite the color rating like we do here. Instead, this whole thing is a copy. So anytime you see those 3 dots, we're making a copy. So we used to be able to do this in JavaScript with something called object.assign. Object.assign is great, but the syntax is a little tricky, and it leads to sometimes bugs if you don't write it perfectly. The spread syntax here is really useful because we're just going to be able to take all of these values, no matter how many values there are. If I had 100 values as part of the lawn color, I could push them all in to this new object. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, if you took the 3 dots out, would it overwrite that?
Yeah, so let's... Exactly. Yeah, so that's gonna run but overwrite it, exactly. So, but did it is a good question. Let's look at that. So, let's take a look.
Well, you don't know because you're only testing the value of rating.
Yeah, so let's look at that. Good call. So what I did is I removed the spread syntax from line 18. Then on line 29, I'm looking at the whole object. So let's look at that. So this would be the entire lawn color here. Yeah, why is that like that? Let's think about that. So title, lawn, rating. Sorry?
No, because you didn't print the whole object for just that method, the first one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not printing the whole object for that first one. So let's look at here. Perfect. That makes sense. I'm gonna need a lot of help up here, y'all, when it's this early in the morning and I'm doing this. So yeah, let's take a look at this. So the first one here, we're going to look at the entire return. So what we see is there's this color object, right? And then we have this rating outside of it. The second thing here is the actual lawn color. So this rate color is returning this entire color object plus a rating outside of that object. In this case, what we want to do is instead of pushing we have an object inside of an object, essentially. So instead of doing that, we want to build a new object, one level, where we just have those values. So if I refresh this, instead of having a nested object here, we're going to have one object with those values. So that's kind of the idea of that. We also see this with arrays. So let's say we have an array of, let's say, technologies, JavaScript, GraphQL, and let's say Node. And then we said const new array, new spread array. Then what we could do is we could take all of those values from the array, and then we could add another one to it. So what's your favorite programming language? Call one out. Ruby, let's do it. Doesn't Ruby have something similar to this? A spread type thing? Or is that something else? That's something else. So then we could say console log new spread array. And what we'll see, and we'll get rid of this stuff, and what we'll see is that this is going to push all of these values into a new array. If I get rid of the ... here, then we're going to have a nested array. So here we have JavaScript GraphQL. That's the first entry in the new array. And then Ruby is outside of that. So in order to make a copy, but to capture all of those values, we're going to use that syntax. Cool. Does that help a little bit? Yes. That's a problem with my head being right there. Let's see. So let me fix my screen so that we can see that a little better, because that's not going to do it. All right, cool. What questions do you have while I get my screen sorted out? Anybody? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Performance with the copy? Sure. So with all things performance, I would definitely recommend, before worrying too much about performance, make sure that performance is actually a problem. But also, the spread is a little bit slower, I will admit. But look at how cool the syntax is. Look at how nice the syntax is. I say that not to diminish the importance of performance, but instead to say, like, if that millisecond of difference between the two is an actual problem, then perhaps change that to a push or something like this. But what's the nice thing about this is that our copy is going to mean that we don't have all these nested arrays, nested objects, and other problems like that. But yeah, test all the things. And what's really cool about React is there is a new profiler, and I'll show you that with our React developer tools, and the profiler will tell you exactly how long it's taking for all of those components to render. So if spread backs you into a corner and you're like, spread, you gotta go, that's totally fine, but I haven't really noticed it causing too many problems. That's a great one. Others? Yeah? So far, what have I shown you that's unique to React? Nothing. I've shown you nothing even about React at all. But we've talked about several of those. I think we're talking now about fundamentals. So think about a skier who is perfecting their downhill turns. Their edges are perfect. Their focus is perfect. And they're making it around each and every one of those little flags. They're doing that because they've really mastered the fundamentals. They know that the edge of their ankle, they've made this turn 1,000,000 times. They're ready to go. This is that. This is those fundamentals. So what have we covered so far? We've talked about immutability. So we know that we want to not destroy our existing objects. We want to make copies of them whenever possible so that we have that data that we can refer back to. We also talked about, what else did we talk about? I'll scroll up. Imperative versus declarative, right? So imperative says, let's do this in this order and make this thing happen. With React, we think about it more in a declarative model, where we say, this is a function, and we describe what we want to happen versus how it should happen. And then finally, we talked about functions being variables. So the reason I talk about functions being variables is because when we create React components are functions. And these functions are going to deliver to us pieces of user interface that we can display on our pages. So I haven't talked about anything related to React yet, but it's core to everything that makes React cool. Go ahead. Sure. Am I going to have an example with user interface elements? Do you think I would come here and not show you the React library at a React talk? Of course I'm going to. Yeah, absolutely. So multi-threading, parallelism, that stuff more relates to like how we're serving up our React applications. So with Node, we can take advantage of those things. So a lot of Node applications use React as the UI. So that stuff is more of a back-end concern, but React definitely would work with that. So, all right. So to your point, this is all of our fundamentals. This is getting us ready to climb the mountain. Now we gotta climb that mountain. Let's do it. Ready? All right, so here's what I wanna do. I'm gonna open up this other index file called React Intro. Then I'm going to make sure that I open up the correct window. And we see in this index file that there are a couple of dependencies that have been added to this file. So this is pretty small, but yes. So I'm zooming out just to show that these are script tags. Let's zoom in on what these are. So the first thing is React. So we need React to work with the React library. We also need something called React DOM. React DOM is the library that's going to help us take our React components and add them to the page. So we need these two things to get started. Now, I'll show you a couple of different ways to get started with a React project today, but this is kind of the simplest way. We can always use just an index file and throw some React code up on the page. Question back there? Yeah, that's a great question. So is there any reason that these things are separate? There is. So in previous versions of React, everything was in just the React library. That's all you needed to get started. But when the React library authors started to iterate on this project a little more, they realized we need React to get started with a React project that uses a user interface. And we need React DOM to add things to the browser DOM, so add to a website. But React also has React Native. So React Native will help us to build native applications using JavaScript. We also have something called server-rendered React applications that don't use the DOM at all. So what this is doing is it's splitting these out so that if you don't need React DOM, then you can choose not to include it. And performance-wise, that's really good, right? Because it'll make our applications load a little faster. So that's the reason for the two different packages for React. Now, in order to get started here, let's go ahead and set this up. So you asked about adding actual UI components. That's a very good reason to be here. We are going to do just that. So here on our page, we have this div called root. Does everybody see that? It says div root. So the way that a React application works is that we're going to, using JavaScript, create some code that will inject into that root element. So we're going to take some React code, and we're going to put it on the page here in the root. And the thing that we're going to put on the page is called a React element. What's a React element? It's simply just a piece of UI. An H1, a heading element. That's a React element. A div, that's a React element. When we build applications, when we build something like Twitter or PayPal or something like this, it's just a collection of these elements. So here on line 14, we're going to say React DOM. That's the thing that's going to help us add it to the page. Remember I said that was a thing. We're going to say React DOM.render. And then I'm going to say React.createElement. And the first thing I'll add here is an H1. So I describe what I want to create. Then I pass any child elements. So in other words, do I want, or properties, I should say. Do I want this thing to have any properties, classes, IDs, etc.? In this case, I don't. And then the third thing is what I said before, the child element. So I want this to display some text. So these are the three arguments that are going to be sent to this here. Now the second argument that is sent to React DOM.render is going to be where I want to put this element on the page. So I can use simple DOM selection, document.getElement by ID, and then I'll use the name of it root. So at this point, we can hide our dev tools, and we can give this a save. And then we're going to see something rendered to the page. How cool is that? So what we've rendered is a simple H1. It doesn't have any properties at all, but it does have some child code, and that child code is just some text, and we're going to render that to the root. So far, so good? It's happening. We're rendering stuff. It's not, I guess it is 10 a.m. It was almost not 10 a.m. So we can think about these as just being variables, just being functions that are rendering some code. So I could say like const dish. I could take this create element call, and then I can pass the name of this dish variable as the first argument to the React DOM.render function. I can hit refresh, and we'll see some baked salmon there. All right. So that's how we render a single React element. Pretty cool. Vaguely cool, sort of cool. The second thing I want to do is I want to actually render something a little more dynamic. So this time I'm going to create a variable called cities. And I'm going to make this a lot smaller, because this is sort of ugly anyway, and we'll make that a lot bigger. And then this time I want a list of cities from you all. Hit me with some cities. St. Louis, perfect. One more. Columbus, Midwest represent. What else? Chicago, love it. I was born in Columbus, I lived in Chicago. I've never been to St. Louis, I'll have to go. So at this point I have an array. Think about a React application as just being a way of taking your data and turning it into UI. So here's what I'm going to do on line 18. I'm going to create a variable called list. This time I'm going to use react.createElement, and I want to describe what kind of element I want to create as the first value. So UL, an unordered list, is the first of these items. The second thing I'll add here is an object. And this object should say class name, cities. So I'm giving it a class in the UI. Now the third thing I'm going to add here is any child elements. So think about your unordered list. It's a collection of list items, right? So I can say react.createElement. And this time I need to create list items for each of these. So here's how that's going to look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over this array so that I can create all of those list items. So we'll say cities.map. Then I'm going to take in a city, and for each of these, I want to call react.createElement. We're going to create an li. We'll not pass any properties here, so we'll say null. And then we'll say city. So does that track? We have a city list. We have a variable called list. This list variable is going to create an element, an unordered list. It then is going to map over all of our data, cities.map, and it's going to create a list item dynamically for every item in this array. If we push more items into that array, using that spread operator maybe, like we saw before, pretty cool, we're going to be able to see that. So this time, let's, instead of rendering our dish, we're going to render a list. And now we see St. Louis, Columbus, Chicago. It's there for real, see? Pretty cool. And then if I add another city like what? Gotham City, a dark but fun city to talk about. We'll add that to the list dynamically. So depending on our data, depending on the state of that data, it's going to always populate that list. All right. So at the core of React, we're still walking this mountain, right? We've learned a little bit about some of the JavaScript programming features that we can take advantage of to build React apps, or ones that you see quite a bit in React apps. We've used React.createElement to create these React elements. But if you really are working powerfully with React, you're probably not going to be using these create element calls. This is pretty complicated syntax, right? I'm shocked that I didn't make a typo while trying to render that, because it's tough stuff. What we can take advantage of with React is something called JSX. So JSX is JavaScript as XML. That's what that stands for. And it's a way of writing a tag-based syntax right here in our JavaScript code. So remember that whole give it 5 minutes thing I was talking about before? This is one of those cases where we want to give it 5 minutes, because what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to get rid of this complicated syntax and instead replace it with tags. So don't worry about this array of data here. What I have added to this page, though, is I still have React, I still have React DOM, and I have this thing called Babel. So if we want to write JavaScript, if we want to write JSX tags in our JavaScript code, we need this thing called Babel to take those tags and turn them into code that looks like create element from before. So all Babel and JSX are helping us, I guess, not do is not write all of this extra syntax here. So instead, what we can do is we can write tags. I've talked a lot about these tags. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So let me get started by making sure I'm in the right file. We'll say O3 JSX. And this time, inside of my script tag, we're going to write a function. So we'll say React DOM.render. Remember the two arguments that it takes in. It takes in the thing we want to render as the first thing. So this time we want to actually render a function. So think about your user interface as just being a collection of functions that return UI elements. They return components. So this time we're going to create something called people. So the people function is going to return a section. And this section is going to have an H1 in it. So this H1 will look like this. So I'm going to just add some text here. I'll say hello from React. Now the next thing I'm going to do is, this is the function. This is the thing, the component that I want to render. So using JSX, using this HTML-like syntax, what I can do is I can say, let's render people as our first element. Notice it's a tag. XML fans from long ago. This should look familiar. Maybe no fans, but users. We'll say document.getElement by ID root. So now, if we refresh this, we're going to see a couple things happen. So first off, We're rendering that people component. We're rendering that H1. So what is Babel doing? Babel's taking all of this code here, and it's turning it into syntax that looked more like our previous file. React.createElement. Create a section. Create an H1. And you can actually see this going on if you look at your script here. So it's just injecting all of that into the script. So it's pretty cool. So this is vaguely nice to work with. But the real power of React starts to show up when we start thinking about it like we did before. How do we take dynamic data and load it into a user interface? And the way that we do this in React is with something called props. Please. You're right. Skip those people. That's a spoiler for something that's going to happen soon. So right now, all we're rendering is this. This function is returning a little blob of JSX. It's a JavaScript syntax that looks like HTML so that we can write a huge component tree so that we can write a full user interface simply with tags. And then we render this right here. So we say react-dom.render. So this data down here is nothing. You're right. It's absolutely nothing. We're going to render that in 1 second. Go ahead, please.
So is the function people line input render open bracket people space /
Exactly. Yeah. So how, why, who? Yeah, totally. It's a great question. So how is the people function related to what's going on line 24? So React has this syntax called JSX. It looks a lot like HTML. So on line 16 there, where it says function people, that's where we're creating a component. The component has a name, people. And then if we want to render that person, and render, I just mean if we want to throw that on the page, and we want to throw it here on this root element, we can reference it with its name.
Just to prove this, can you misspell one of them?
I'd love to. So let's call it pancake, right? We see it's changed. People, pancake. I'll hit a refresh. We'll get rid of this. That's going to help me later, I swear. And then we refresh, and we don't see it. Pancake is not defined. But if I change the name of this to pancake, we see it. Cool. Can you prove that is my favorite question, because I agree. So JSX is part of React. It's a syntax that was introduced with React just as a way of making this a little bit easier to write. Instead of having to say react.createElement, H1, and then all of the children, and then we're typing all day, and we missed our son's soccer game and all this stuff, we can instead use a syntax like we're familiar with, like HTML. And then what happens with Babel, the Babel step, it takes all of those tags and it turns them into, it compiles them into react.createElement calls. So it's doing all of that behind the scenes so that we don't have to do it.
So without Babel, this wouldn't work?
Yeah.
It would not?
It would not. So can you prove that?
No, you don't have to prove that. Just tell me Babel is part of React.
So Babel is another library. Babel is often associated with React because it is so helpful with this JSX stuff. But it also will take new JavaScript syntax of any kind and turn it into syntax that the browser can use. So with JavaScript, we used to have to wait. As they release new features, we'd have to wait for browser vendors to implement all of those features. Now we can use that stuff right away because of Babel. Totally, yeah. Babbel's helping us out. We want to use the cool stuff today. We don't want to wait. We want to use it now. So we can do so with Babbel. Go ahead. Yeah.
Why not just say render people without the ugly tags around it?
The ugly tags, very, very upsetting as you first look at React. The first time JSX was talked about at a conference, people were like, no, we hate this. This is bad. But it's really helpful because that's just what the syntax for JSX looks like. So why not is just so that we don't have to write react.createElement section and then everything underneath that. It's a shorthand for this.
But it almost looks like you're injecting HTML into function.
Yeah. This is like a support group for people who are just being introduced to JSX. It's tough to sometimes see because that syntax is upsetting. Why are we putting something that looks like HTML in our code? And I felt that way definitely too. But the reason is just so that this is a little shorter, arguably, than this, right? It's also a very different thing. Like a list, you mean? Yes and no. Because we would still have to, ooh, sorry. Right, but it's still, as this people function, it's pretty small, I totally agree. We're on the same page 100%. But as it gets bigger, it's gonna continue to be tricky to manage all of those create element calls. So this is just helping us write cleaner syntax. If we're working with folks who hate JavaScript, feels like there might be a couple in this room. Sorry. Yeah, we're adding to it. So this is just gonna help us out. So in order to make good on my promise of talking about cool React things, let's take this one step further. So our function here called people, right? It's rendering just some text. Let's make it render something a little bit more dynamic. So here's what we'll do. We're gonna pass in this thing called props. Then inside of the H1, we're going to use props dot, let's say, greeting. Then here on line 24, we're gonna say greeting. And then the greeting that we'll use here is, hello, everyone. I'm sorry about JSX. It will be good, I promise. Give it 5 minutes. Okay, that's a long greeting. However, this is our way of taking some data, the greeting, and injecting it into this component via this thing called props. Think about props as just being an object filled with data that your components can access and reference by props.greeting or props.title or props.cities or whatever. So here we'll hit refresh. We'll refresh here. That looks really good. The CSS is really dialed in today. But this is going to take this greeting and it's going to inject it into this component. So remember the thing I said about our user interface just being a reflection of our data? Take some data, make some UI. That's kind of the core principle of what React is for. We're taking some data, in this case, super simple data, but as this scales, think about any user interface you use, Facebook being the prime example of this. You have a photo for a person and a message and all the Facebook things. But it's just a reflection of that data. Okay, so I'm gonna make good on this too. I'd like to pull somebody up from the audience, and I'm gonna interview you right now. So if you don't wanna be interviewed, don't volunteer. Just a brief interview. Or I can do it from the stage. I'll stand here all day until someone volunteers. I don't care. All right, someone's name. You broke me. What name can we throw in here?
Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Ben's my friend. He's not going to hang me out to dry up here. And what is your favorite hobby, Ben?
Probably riding my bike.
All right, biking. So we're going to say, there we go. We're going to say it loudly, very microphony. So we're going to say function person. We're going to take in some props. Remember, props are just our data. And here we're going to return a section, an HTML tag. And for each one of these sections, we're going to display a person's name. So from that data, we'll display their name. So props.name. Cool. So this is our first example of kind of constructing a user interface that has more than one component. We have a people component, and then we have a person component that live inside of that. So the next step is the people component, right? That's a bunch of people. A person, that's one person. So the people component is going to need to render as many persons as there are in our data. Does that seem feasible? Okay, cool. So what we'll do here is we're going to, in the people component, we're going to iterate over that just like we've done before. So we're going to say props.people.map. And then we'll, for each of these persons, for each person, we're going to render, and if you hate this syntax, it's back. We're going to render this person. Now, this person is going to have a few different properties too. Think about all of these people. We need to take this data and make it available in that component. So what we'll do is this. We're going to say name, and we'll say person.name. And I'm not going to worry about the hobbies because we're dangerously low on time. So in this case, what we're going to do is instead of what we did before where we just added that string, in this case, we're going to take all of this people data that everyone wanted to give me. Everyone's begging, like, please me. And we wanted to pass it to this people component. So what we'll do here is this. So we'll say people equals people. So this is how we're going to make that connection between our data and the component that's being rendered. So let's see how we're doing. That was fast. We knew that wasn't going to work. Cannot read property map of undefined. Props.people. Why? You're right. Cool. So these in my head were parentheses, but if we're returning anything that is in these curly braces, we need to return JavaScript, right? So at this point, oh boy. What's up? Okay, cool. No, that's good. We got that. We're good. All right, everyone turn around. Look at the back of the room. here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna find our bug by copying and pasting, just like life. I'm chill. I'm relaxing. So I'm gonna kick back here. So here's what we'll do. Yeah, we're gonna make stuff work. So later, yeah. All right, cool. So the person, oh, props. What did you say? Oh, yeah. I'm not at all. So that'll help, but it won't. Okay, cool. So here's what I want to do. Props.name. Okay, cool. So what I would do if it wasn't 10:30 is I would show you this. But the idea being, we're going to take that data and we're going to pass it into that component. So let me go back. People are clapping. Not for me. I don't deserve that. Cool. Yeah, probably. Cool, so here's what I want to do. I'm going to point out that I have all of this stuff running. If you go to Eve Porcello, and then our lovely repo here is notes for React, which I'll make public. So all of the code for today's class, including whatever typo you saw today, I'm not going to stress out, because it's all there and you can look at it there. So we also have a ton of extra links here. So in all of these extra links, materials that will keep you busy learning React things for a very long time. So I hope what you take away from today is that our functional approaches to React can be seen as you build real-world applications. We also saw how JSX works a little bit, so how we create that are going to take our data and display it. And then I'm going to point you in the direction of a couple other things like create React app and state with hooks that will take you on the next steps. So with that being said, the next talk that's in this room is by the wonderful Ben Elegbadu, and he's going to talk to you about the whole ecosystem of React tools that exist out there to help you take the next steps. So I want to thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of the day.